Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the EU's Valiant, watching the massive alien station grow larger on the main screen. After 300 years of dreaming about this moment, humanity was finally meeting another intelligent species. The station called Nexus Prime looked like a giant metal flower floating in space, with dozens of different ships docked to its petals. "Captain, we're getting a signal from the station," said Lieutenant Danny Park from his position at communications. "They're speaking English somehow." "Put it through," Jake ordered, straightening his uniform. He had practiced this moment 1,000 times, but his heart still pounded against his chest. A voice filled the bridge, cold and formal. "Human vessel, you are cleared to dock at Bay 7. Your diplomatic party will be escorted to the meeting chamber immediately upon arrival." Jake nodded to his pilot. "Take us in, Rodriguez. Nice and easy." The docking process went smoothly, and soon Jake found himself walking through corridors that seemed designed for creatures much larger than humans. Ambassador Lisa Grant walked beside him, her diplomatic case held firmly in her hands. Behind them followed Dr. Ryan Walsh, their best expert on alien biology, and 6 Marines in dress uniforms. "Remember," Lisa whispered as they approached the meeting chamber, "we want to make a good first impression. These people control half the local galaxy. One wrong move, and humanity might never get another chance." The doors opened, and Jake felt his breath catch. The chamber was enormous, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. Strange alien beings filled tiered seats around a central platform. Some looked like giant insects, others resembled walking plants, and a few seemed to be made of living crystal. At the center of the platform sat the most impressive creature Jake had ever seen. High Chancellor Vexter was 12 feet tall, the serpentine body covered in dark green scales. His head was triangular like a snake's, but his eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably advanced. Golden rings circled his neck, and a crown of sharp metal spikes sat on his head. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber like rolling thunder. "So," Vexter said, his yellow eyes fixed on the human delegation, "these are the new creatures that dare to enter our space without permission." Lisa stepped forward, her voice calm and professional. "Honored Chancellor, we come in peace. Humanity seeks friendship and trade with the Zephyrian hegemony and all the species represented here today." A sound like hissing laughter came from several of the alien observers. Vexler's forked tongue flicked out to taste the air. "Peace. Trade. How amusing. Tell me, small creatures, do you understand where you are?" "We understand that this is neutral space," Lisa replied. "A place where different species can meet safely to discuss important matters." "Indeed it is," Vexler agreed. "And do you understand the proper protocol for inferior species when addressing their betters?" Jake felt his jaw tighten. The word inferior hit him like a slap across the face. He had spent 20 years in the military, fighting pirates and rebels across human space. No one had ever called him inferior before. Lisa maintained her diplomatic composure. "You're not familiar with your customs, Chancellor? Perhaps you could explain what you expect?" Vexler rose from his throne, his massive form casting a shadow over the human delegation. The submission prostration. "You will lie flat on your bellies, with your faces pressed to the floor, while you beg for the privilege of speaking to your superiors." The chamber fell silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Round them, dozens of alien eyes watched to see what the humans would do. Some of the creatures seemed amused, others appeared bored, as if they had seen this scene play out many times before. Lisa looked at Jake, then back at the Chancellor. "I'm afraid we can't do that." "Cannot?" Vexler's voice rose in pitch. "Or will not?" "Will not," Jake said, stepping beside Lisa. He had kept quiet long enough. He came here to talk as equals, not to grovel on the floor. The reaction was immediate. Gasps and hisses came from the gallery. Several of the insect-like creatures began clicking in what sounded like agitation. Vexler's eyes narrowed to yellow slits. "Quills." The Chancellor's voice dripped with disbelief. "You pathetic little apes, think you are our equals?" Jake felt something snap inside him. He had faced down enemy warships and stared death in the face more times than he could count. He was not about to bow down to anyone, no matter how big they were or how many ships they commanded. "We're not apes," Jake said calmly. "We're humans. And yes, we consider ourselves equal to anyone in this room." Instead of prostrating himself, Jake did something that came naturally to every human who had ever lived. He extended his right hand toward Vexter in an offer to shake hands. The chamber erupted. Alien voices rose in a cacophony of shock and outrage. Several of the crystal beings began glowing bright red, while the plant-like creatures rustled their leaves in what was clearly distress. Vexter reared back as if Jake had pointed a weapon at him. "Challenge gesture." Someone screamed from the gallery. The human makes the challenge gesture. Vexter's scales seemed to darken, and his neck expanded like a cobra preparing to strike. "You dare challenge the authority of the hegemony? You dare threaten me in this sacred place?" Jake looked at his extended hand, then at the Chancellor's terrified expression. He had no idea what a challenge gesture was. It was clear that his simple offer of a handshake had been misunderstood in the worst possible way. "I wasn't threatening anyone," Jake said, lowering his hand. "I was trying to be polite. Vexter's laugh was like breaking glass. "You offer violence and call it politeness? What manner of savage creatures are you?" Dr. Walsh stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "Chancellor, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. In human culture, extending one's hand is a gesture of friendship and respect, not aggression." "Silence," Vexter roared. "I have seen enough of your species' nature. You're clearly the most arrogant and dangerous creatures we have encountered. You refuse to show proper submission, and then you threaten violence when we object." Lisa tried one more time to salvage the situation. "Chancellor, please, we don't want violence. We want peace between our peoples." Vexter descended from his throne, his massive form looming over the humans. "Peace is no longer possible. You have forced our hand with your arrogance and aggression. The hegemony offers you two choices, as we offer all inferior species: submit completely to our authority or be destroyed utterly." The chamber fell silent. Again, Jay could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. Humanity's first contact with alien life, and it was going completely wrong. But as he looked at Vexter's expectant expression, he knew there was only one answer he could give. "We choose neither," Lisa said before Jake could speak. Her voice was steady and clear. "Humanity will not submit to anyone, but we also will not be destroyed. If you attack us, we will defend ourselves." The silence that followed was deafening. No one in the chamber seemed to know how to react. In their experience, species always chose one option or the other. No one had ever refused both. Vexter's eyes widened, then narrowed again. "Impossible. You cannot refuse both options. Choose. Now, or we will choose for you." "We already chose," Jake said. "We choose to remain free and independent. If that means war, then so be it." Vexter stared at the humans for a long moment, as if he could not believe what he was hearing. Finally, he threw back his great head and laughed. "War? You think your primitive species can wage war against the combined might of the hegemony? We command fleets that number in the thousands. We have conquered star systems while your people, we're still crawling in caves." "Maybe," Jake replied. "But you'll find that humans are harder to kill than you think." Vexter's laughter died. He looked at Jake with something that might have been respect, or might have been the look a predator gives its prey before striking. "Very well," the Chancellor said formally. "By the ancient laws of the hegemony, I hereby declare war upon the species known as humanity. May your death serve as a lesson to other upstart races who forget their place in the natural order." As alarms began sounding throughout the station, Jake and his team were escorted back to their ship under heavy guard. The last thing Jake saw before the doors closed was Vexter's satisfied smile, as if he had just solved a minor problem that had been bothering him. But as the Valiant undocked and jumped to hyperspace, carrying news of humanity's first, and possibly last contact with alien life, Jake could not shake the feeling that the Chancellor had no idea what he had just started. 3 months had passed since the declaration of war, and General Amy Tucker sat in her command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching reports flow in from across human space. The news was not good. The Zephyrian hegemony had moved faster than anyone expected, and 2 human outposts had already fallen. "Ma'am, we're getting word from the Kepler station," said Colonel Martinez, her aide. "They held out for 6 hours before surrendering. 17 survivors taken prisoner." Amy nodded grimly. She had activated Protocol Sparta the day after Captain Morrison returned with news of the war declaration. Every civilian factory on Earth was now producing weapons, ships, or supplies for the military. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels were now turning out warships. But it would take time, and time was something humanity did not have much of. "What about the prisoners?" she asked. "Unknown, ma'am, but we're tracking the Zephyrian ships. They're heading for a prison facility on Arcturus 7. Amy stood and walked the large display, showing the galaxy. Red dots marked Zephyrian positions, while blue dots showed human settlements. There were far more red dots than blue ones. "Keep monitoring. If our people are alive, we need to know where they are." On Arcturus 7, Marine Sergeant Billy Cross sat in a cell that was too big for him. Everything on this prison station was built for creatures much larger than humans. The walls were 20 feet high, and the door was wide enough for a truck to drive through. But it was still a prison, and Billy was still a prisoner. The cell door opened with a hiss, and a Zephyrian guard entered. This one was smaller than the Chancellor Billy had heard about, but still twice as tall as a human. Its scales were a lighter green, and it wore what looked like a military uniform covered in strange symbols. "I am Intelligence Officer Kethman," the creature said in accented English. "I am here to ask you questions about your species." Billy leaned back against the wall and crossed his arms. "Name, rank, and serial number. That's all you get." "That will not be sufficient," Kethman replied. "We need to understand your people's capabilities, your weaknesses, your military structure." "Good luck with that," Billy said with a grin. "I'm just a grunt. I don't know anything important." "Dreth." Kethman studied the human for a moment. "You do not seem afraid. Should I be?" "Most species tremble when they are captured by the hegemony. So they beg for mercy or offer information in exchange for better treatment." Billy shrugged. "I've been captured before, twice by pirates, once by rebels on Titan. Still here aren't." Kethman's head tilted to one side. "You have been captured by your own species. Sure, humans fight each other all the time. Always have." "I do not understand." "Your people are at war with themselves." Billy laughed. "Not right now, but we were for most of our history. Hell, we had a world war that lasted 6 years and killed 50 million people. Had another one 20 years later that was even worse." Kethman's scales seemed to pale. 50 million. That is impossible. No species destroys itself on such a scale. "Check your records if you don't believe me. We call it World War II. Happened about 400 years ago. Before that we had thousands of smaller wars. We've been fighting each other for 10,000 years. Easy." The Zephyrian intelligence officer was quiet for a long time. "You speak of this as if it is normal. It is normal. It's for us anyway. War is just something that happens. People disagree, they fight, somebody wins, life goes on." Kethman left the cell without another word. Billy watched him go and wondered what had upset the aliens so much. He had just been telling the truth about human history. Nothing special about it. Later that day, Kethman stood in the communications center of the prison station, speaking to his superiors on Zephyrian Prime. The holographic image of High Chancellor Vexther listened as Kethman made his report. "The human prisoner claims his species has been in constant warfare for 10,000 of their years," Kethman said. "He speaks of conflicts that killed millions of their own people." "Impossible," Vexther replied. "No intelligent species would survive such self-destruction." "I have verified his claims through their own historical records, Chancellor. The humans have fought over 700 major wars in the last 3,000 years. Their planet has never known true peace." Vexther was silent for a moment. "What manner of creatures are these?" "I do not know, Chancellor. They treat warfare as a natural part of existence." The prisoner showed no distress when describing battles that killed millions. He seemed to consider it normal. "Bring me their historians," Vexther ordered. "I want to understand what we are facing." Dr. Elena Vasquez had been working on her research when the Zephyrians captured the university station where she taught. As Earth's leading expert on military history, she had been studying human warfare for 30 years. Now she found herself standing before the High Chancellor of the Zephyrian hegemony, trying to explain something that seemed impossible to alien minds. "You claim your species has never known peace," Vexler said. "Explain this to me." Alina adjusted her glasses and thought about how to make the alien understand. "Chancellor, in human history, there have been perhaps 50 years total when no war was being fought anywhere on our planet. 50 years out of 10,000. "That is madness," Vexler replied. "How does any civilization survive constant warfare?" "War is how we evolved," Alina explained. "We didn't just develop technology to explore space or grow food. We developed it to kill each other more efficiently. Every major human invention has been used as a weapon at some point. But surely you have some concept of peace." Alina nodded. "Of course we do. We want peace. But we define peace differently than you do. To humans, peace isn't the absence of war. Peace is the time you use to prepare for the next war." Kethman, who had been listening from the side, spoke. She speaks truth, Chancellor. I've studied their records. They have a saying, "If you want peace, prepare for war." We have other sayings too, Alina added. "War is diplomacy by other means. All's fair in love and war. To the victor, go the spoils." Vexler leaned forward on his throne. "And you believe this constant warfare makes you strong? Makes us survivors," Alina said. "Every human alive today is descended from people who won their wars. We've been naturally selecting for tactical intelligence, adaptability, and the will to fight for thousands of generations." "What does this mean for our current conflict?" Vexler asked. Alina was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Chancellor, you've never fought a war against a species that considers warfare their natural state. You've conquered species that saw war as an unfortunate necessity. Humans see war as just another form of competition, and this makes you dangerous? This makes us unpredictable. When most species lose a battle, they surrender or retreat. When humans lose a battle, we analyze what went wrong and try a different approach. Don't just fight to win, Chancellor. We fight to make sure our enemies can never threaten us again." Kethman felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean by that?" Alina looked at the intelligence officer with sad eyes. "We have a concept called total war. It means that everything and everyone connected to your enemy becomes a legitimate target. Their soldiers, their factories, their supply lines, their will to fight. We don't just defeat our enemies, we make them incapable of being enemies. You destroy entire civilizations," Vexler asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "If we have to," Alina said simply. "We prefer not to, but if someone threatens human survival, we will use any means necessary to protect ourselves." The chamber fell silent. Vexler stared at the small human woman, who had just described concepts that were foreign to everything the Zephyrians understood about warfare. They had fought wars of conquest, wars of territory, even wars of pride. But they had never conceived of war as a tool for the complete elimination of threats. "How many of your kind think this way?" Vexler finally asked. "All of us," Alina replied. "Every human child learns about war from the moment they can understand stories. We study famous battles, great generals, brilliant tactics. We teach our children that sometimes violence is the only answer to a problem." Kethman stepped forward. "Chancellor, I believe we may have made an error in judgment." "What kind of error?" "Assumed the humans were a typical species, thought they would follow the same patterns as every other race we have encountered, but they are not typical." Vexler looked at Alina, then at Kethman. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that we may have declared war on a species that is better at warfare than we are." Alina cleared her throat. "Chancellor, may I ask you a question?" "Speak." "How many wars has the Zephyrian hegemony fought in the last 1,000 years?" Vexler considered. "Perhaps a dozen major conflicts." "And how many did you lose?" "None. We are always victorious." Alina nodded. "That's what I thought." "Chancellor, humans have fought thousands of wars in the same time period. We've won some and lost some. But we learned something from every single one. We learned from our victories, and we learned even more from our defeats. What did you learn? Learned that there's always a way to win if you're willing to pay the price. We learned that the side that adapts fastest usually wins. We learned that in war, the only rule is that there are no rules. As Elena was escorted back to her cell, Vexter turned to Kethman. Double our intelligence-gathering efforts. 1 year after the war began, Admiral Kate Williams stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching her fleet prepare for battle. 12 months ago, Earth had possessed 36 military ships. Today, Kate commanded over 400 vessels, and more were launching from shipyards every week. Admiral, we're detecting the Zephyrian fleet, reported Commander Johnson from the sensor station. 47 ships, holding position near the asteroid belt. Kate nodded. The Battle of Proxima Station would be humanity's first major offensive operation. For a year, they had been playing defense, learning how the enemy fought, adapting their tactics. Now it was time to show the galaxy what humans could do when they stopped holding back. Signal all ships, Kate ordered. Execute plan. Delta. The human fleet spread out in a formation that would have confused any Zephyrian commander. Instead of the neat, organized battle lines that every civilized species used, the humans scattered like a school of fish, each ship moving independently, but somehow still working together. On the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Corthavel watched the human approach with growing unease. They have no formation, he said to his tactical officer. No discipline. They fight like savages. Perhaps that is their weakness, the tactical officer replied. We will destroy them easily with our superior organization. But as the battle began, it became clear that the humans were anything but easy to destroy. Their ships moved in unpredictable patterns, changing course and speed constantly. When the Zephyrians fired their massive energy cannons, the human ships simply weren't where they were supposed to be. They're not following standard combat protocols, Corthavel observed with growing frustration. How can we target them if they won't stay in formation? The answer came when human missiles began striking Zephyrian ships from impossible angles. The humans had somehow fired their weapons, then changed course, making it look like the attack was coming from a different direction. Entirely. Admiral Williams, this is Captain Pete Johnson, on the Defiant, came a voice over Kate's communications system. I'm making my run now. Kate watched on her tactical display as Johnson's ship accelerated directly toward the largest Zephyrian vessel. It looked like a suicide attack, and in a way, it was. But Pete Johnson had no intention of dying today. The Defiant slammed into the Zephyrian dreadnought at maximum speed, her reinforced hull tearing through the alien ship's armor like paper. At the last possible second, Johnson ejected in an escape pod while his unmanned ship continued its destructive path through the enemy vessel. The dreadnought broke apart in a series of explosions that lit up the darkness of space. Other Zephyrian ships began to retreat, their commanders unable to understand how humans could use their own vessels as weapons. All ships pursue and destroy, Kate ordered. Don't let them escape to tell others about our tactics. But on Earth, the real war machine was just getting started. In factories that had once built civilian goods, Tony Rodriguez supervised the production of weapons that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Human engineering was different from alien technology. Where other species built elegant, efficient systems, humans built things that worked under the worst possible conditions. The new torpedo design is ready for testing, Tony told General Tucker during their daily briefing. It's not pretty, but it'll punch through any armor the Zephyrians have. Amy looked at the weapon specifications on her tablet. It says here that it has a 50% chance of exploding during launch. That's why we launch them in pairs, Tony replied with a grin. If one blows up, the other one still hits the target. And if both explode, then we launch for next time. This was human engineering in its purest form. It's not elegant, not sophisticated, but brutally effective. Other species spent years designing the perfect weapon. Humans built something that worked, then improved it while using it in battle. The results were showing up across the war zone. Human ships were now equipped with weapons that confused and terrified Zephyrian crews. missiles that changed course mid-flight, energy weapons that could be overloaded to produce massive but short-lived bursts of power, an armor that was designed not to prevent damage, but to keep fighting even after being damaged. On the prison station at Arcturus 7, the war was taking an unexpected turn. Commander Nick Foster had been captured during the fall of Kepler Station, but he had not been sitting idle in his cell. As a former Navy SEAL, Nick understood that being captured was just another phase of combat. "Tonight's the night," he whispered to Billy Cross in the exercise yard. "Are you ready?" Billy nodded. Over the past months, the human prisoners had been studying their captors, learning their routines, finding their weaknesses. The Zephyrians were efficient jailers, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed that human prisoners would behave like the prisoners of every other species they had captured. Other species, when imprisoned, would wait patiently for rescue or release. They would follow prison rules and hope for eventual freedom. Humans, on the other hand, saw imprisonment as just another problem to solve. That night, Nick put his plan into action. Using tools they had improvised from prison equipment, the humans began their escape. But this wasn't just a simple breakout. This was a military operation planned and executed by people who had spent their lives learning how to kill efficiently. The first Zephyrian guard died without making a sound. Nick had approached him during the normal night patrol, moving with the silence that had made human special forces legendary. The guard's neck snapped with a quiet crack, and Nick caught the body before it could fall. "Cell block secured," he whispered into his improvised communicator. The humans had built their own communication system from spare parts, something the Zephyrians had never imagined possible. Within an hour, every guard on the station was dead. The humans had moved through the facility like ghosts, striking without warning and leaving no survivors. When the relief shift arrived in the morning, they found empty guard posts and open cell doors. But the humans hadn't just escaped. They had stolen a Zephyrian transport ship and downloaded the station's entire database. When they arrived at the human fleet rendezvous point, they brought with them detailed information about Zephyrian military capabilities, troop positions, and supply lines. "My God," Admiral Williams said as she reviewed the intelligence data. "They had no idea we were planning this level of resistance." The information revealed that the Zephyrians had been preparing for a quick war against a primitive species. Supply lines were organized for rapid conquest, not extended conflict. Their reserve forces were minimal, and their industrial capacity was designed for peacetime production. They expected us to surrender after losing a few battles, Kate realized. Their entire strategy is based on the assumption that we'd give up, but humans didn't give up. As the war entered its second year, this became increasingly clear to everyone. In the galaxy, Zephyrian forces began reporting strange phenomena. Human ships that continued fighting even after suffering catastrophic damage. Human soldiers who refused to surrender even when surrounded and outnumbered. Human civilians who took up arms when their worlds were invaded. Intelligence. Officer Kethman found himself filing reports that his superiors refused to believe. "The humans on Colony 7 held out for 3 months, he reported to High Chancellor Vexther. "When we finally captured the settlement, there were no survivors. They had fought to the last person." "Impossible," Vexther replied. "No rational species fights to extinction. These humans were not soldiers, Chancellor. They were farmers, teachers, shopkeepers. But when we invaded their world, they became warriors." Vexther was beginning to understand that the war was not going according to plan. Zephyrian casualties were mounting, while human resistance seemed to grow stronger with each passing month. Worlds that should have fallen in days were holding out for weeks, and the humans were learning. "They adapt," Kethman continued. "Every tactic we use successfully once becomes useless the second time. They study our methods and develop counters with incredible speed. What do you recommend?" "I recommend we seek peace, Chancellor, before they learn enough to become truly dangerous." But Vexther's pride would not allow him to admit defeat. "Double our forces. Triple them if necessary. These humans cannot resist the full might of the hegemony." Kethman bowed his head. "Yes, Chancellor. But as he left the throne room, Kethman could not shake the feeling that his people were making a terrible mistake. The humans were not becoming dangerous. They were revealing just how dangerous they had always been. On Earth, General Tucker received reports from across human space. The news was better than anyone had dared hope. Human forces were not just holding their ground, they were beginning to push back. "Ma'am, Admiral Williams reports that Proxima Station is secure," Colonel Martinez announced. The entire Zephyrian fleet was destroyed or captured. Amy nodded, but her expression remained serious. "What about casualties?" "Surprisingly light. The new tactics are working better than expected." Amy studied the tactical display showing the entire war zone. Red dots marked Zephyrian positions. Blue dots showed human forces. For the first time since the war began, there were more blue dots than red ones in several sectors. 2 years into the war, Colonel Steve Martinez stood on the observation deck of the UES Hammer. Watching Zephyrian Prime grow larger in the view screen, the planet that had once seemed impossibly distant was now within reach of human weapons. The hunters had become the hunted. "Colonel, we're receiving surrender signals from 3 more systems," reported Lieutenant Wilson from the communication station. "That makes 17 this month." Steve nodded but kept his eyes on the enemy homeworld. Word had spread quickly through Zephyrian space about what happened to planets that resisted human forces. Those that surrendered immediately were treated fairly. Those that fought back were treated as examples. "Sir Admiral Williams is requesting a conference with all ground commanders," Wilson continued. "Tell her I'll be there in 10 minutes, Steve replied. He took one last look at Zephyrian Prime, then headed for the conference room. Admiral Kate Williams looked tired. 2 years of constant warfare had aged her, but her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made her Earth's most successful. "Fleet Commander," around the holographic table sat the leaders of humanity's invasion forces. Men and women who had learned to wage war in ways that terrified entire star systems. "The siege of Zephyrian Prime begins tomorrow," Kate announced. "Intelligence reports that High Chancellor Vexter has fortified the planet with everything they have left. They know this is their last stand." Captain Jenny Kim, commander of the stealth ship program, leaned forward. "My ships have been monitoring their communications for weeks. They're scared, really scared. Some of their military commanders are suggesting surrender." "What about Vexter?" asked Colonel Martinez. "Still refusing to negotiate," Jenny replied. "But his own people are starting to question his leadership." Steve studied the tactical display showing Zephyrian Prime's defenses. "How do we approach this? Full assault or siege?" Kate smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "We do what humans do best. We wait. We surround the planet and cut off all supply lines. Then we let them think about their situation for a while." This was psychological warfare at its finest. Other species might have launched an immediate attack, trading lives for quick victory. Humans understood that sometimes the threat of violence was more effective than violence itself. Dr. Rachel Brooks had spent the last 6 months developing weapons that targeted Zephyrian biology specifically. In her laboratory aboard the research vessel, U.S. Darwin, she had created biological agents that could devastate Zephyrian populations within days. But Admiral Williams had made a decision that surprised everyone. "We're not using them," Kate had announced during the weapons review. "Not yet." But Admiral Rachel had protested. "These weapons could end the war immediately." "Exactly," Kate had replied. "And what would that teach the rest of the galaxy? That humans are monsters who use biological weapons against civilians? They say those for absolute last resort." Instead, human forces used a different kind of weapon: fear. The siege of Zephyrian Prime lasted 3 months. Human ships surrounded the planet in a perfect sphere, allowing nothing in or out. No supplies, no reinforcements, no communications with the outside galaxy. The planet was completely isolated, but the humans didn't attack, they just waited. Every day, Zephyrian defenders watched human ships patrol just outside weapons range. Every night they wondered when the assault would begin. The waiting was worse than any battle could have been. On the surface, High Chancellor Vexter paced in his command bunker, receiving reports that grew worse each day. "Food supplies are running low," his aide reported. Medical supplies are almost gone, and morale is collapsing. Have the humans made any demands? Vexter asked. None, Chancellor. They just wait. This was the psychological warfare that humans had perfected during thousands of years of conflict with each other. The knowledge that attack could come at any moment, but never knowing when, broke the will to fight more effectively than any weapon. Intelligence Officer Kethman entered the bunker carrying a data pad. Chancellor, I have news from the outer systems. Speak. The Galactic Trade Federation has officially declared neutrality in our conflict. They refuse to provide any assistance to either side. Vexter's scales darkened. Cowards. There is more, Kethman continued. The Andromedon Council has begun secret negotiations with human representatives. They are seeking a non-aggression pact. What? Vexter roared. They would abandon their oldest allies? Chancellor, they fear the humans more than they value our friendship. The entire galaxy is watching this war, and they see which side is winning. The truth was that other alien species had been studying the conflict between humans and Zephyrians with growing alarm. What they saw was a species that fought unlike anything in their experience. Humans didn't just defeat their enemies. They made examples of them. The siege of Kepler 9c had become legendary throughout the galaxy. When the Zephyrian fortress world had refused to surrender, human forces had surrounded it and waited. For 6 months, they had done nothing but block all traffic to and from the planet. No attacks, no threats, just patient waiting. Finally, the planet's defenders had tried to break out. The result had been devastating. Human forces had destroyed the entire Zephyrian fleet in a single day, then offered the planet one more chance to surrender. When they refused again, humans had done something that shocked every observer. They had landed on the planet and begun dismantling every piece of military equipment piece by piece, broadcasting the process live to the entire galaxy. They didn't harm civilians, but they made it clear that resistance was futile. The message was simple: surrender now, or watch everything you've built be taken apart, Captain. Jenny Kim's stealth ships had perfected the art of psychological warfare. Her vessels would appear without warning in Zephyrian systems, just long enough to be detected, then disappear again. Zephyrian commanders never knew when or where humans might attack next. It's more effective than destroying their ships, Jenny had explained to Admiral Williams. Fear of attack is more paralyzing than actual attack. Her tactics had worked. Entire Zephyrian fleets had been recalled to defend systems that were never actually threatened. While human forces struck elsewhere, the enemy was chasing shadows while their real positions crumbled. On Zephyrian Prime, the situation was becoming desperate. Food riots had broken out in several cities. Military units were deserting their posts. And High Chancellor Vexter was running out of options. Chancellor Kethman said during their daily briefing, I must speak honestly. We cannot win this war. We can still fight, Vexter replied, but his voice lacked conviction. To what end? The humans have shown they are willing to be patient. They will wait as long as necessary for us to exhaust ourselves. And when we are too weak to resist, they will take what they want anyway. Vexter stared at the tactical display showing human ships surrounding his homeworld. What do you recommend? Negotiate. Well, we still have something to offer in exchange for mercy. Mercy? Vexter laughed bitterly. From the species we declared to be inferior? From the creatures we threatened with extinction? Yes, Kethman replied quietly. Yes, despite everything, they have shown mercy. They spare civilians, and they treat prisoners according to their own laws. They could have used biological weapons to destroy us completely, but they chose not to. This was the most surprising discovery about humans. Despite their reputation for brutality and warfare, they followed strict rules about protecting non-combatants. Other species had expected humans to be savage destroyers, but instead found them to be disciplined soldiers who made careful distinctions between enemies and innocents. The humans fight to win, Kethman continued, but they do not fight to cause unnecessary suffering. They are warriors, not monsters. Vexter was quiet for a long time. Outside the bunker, air raid sirens wailed as another human patrol passed. Overhead, the sound had become so common that most people no longer paid attention to it. "Contact the human fleet," Vexer finally said. "Tell them I wish to discuss terms." "Yes, Chancellor." As Kethman left to send the message, Vexter remained. Alone in his command center, the war that was supposed to have lasted a few months had dragged on for 2 years. The species he had expected to crush easily had instead crushed him. But perhaps most surprising of all, the humans he had declared to be brutal savages had shown more honor in warfare than his own supposedly civilized forces. They fought hard and without mercy for their enemies. But they protected the innocent and followed their own moral code even in the heat of battle, for the first time since the war began. Vexter wondered if perhaps the humans had been right. Perhaps they were. Equals after all. Or perhaps, he thought with growing dread, they were something more than equals. The message went out to the human fleet commander requesting negotiations. The response came back within an hour, simple and direct. Surrender must be unconditional. Negotiations will take place on Earth. Transport will be provided. Vexter read the message and realized that the war was over. Not because his forces had been defeated in battle, but because his will to continue fighting had been systematically destroyed by an enemy that understood warfare better than he ever had. The humans had won without firing a shot at his homeworld. They had won by making him realize that continued resistance was pointless. 3 years after declaring war on humanity, High Chancellor Vexter stood in Geneva's historic Peace Conference building, looking out at the Swiss mountains through tall windows. The irony was not lost on him. He had come to Earth expecting to dictate terms to a defeated enemy. Instead, he was here to beg for mercy from the victors. Admiral Jake Morrison, now promoted to military governor of occupied Zephyrian space, entered the conference room wearing his dress uniform. 3 years of war had changed him. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had won an impossible victory. But his eyes held the wisdom of someone who understood the true cost of that victory. "Chancellor Vexter," Jake said formally. "Welcome to Earth." Vexter studied the human who had started this war with a simple handshake. "Admiral Morrison. I must admit, when we first met, I did not expect our next meeting would be under these circumstances." "Neither did I," Jake replied. "But here we are." Ambassador Lisa Grant entered the room, followed by several other human officials. She now held the title of Secretary of Human Galactic Affairs, a position that had not existed 3 years ago, but was now one of the most important jobs in human government. "Please be seated," Lisa said, gesturing to a chair that had been specially built to accommodate Vexter's serpentine form. "We have much to discuss." Negotiations took place over 3 days. Representatives from dozens of alien species attended as observers, all wanting to understand how this war would end and what it would mean for the galaxy. Dr. Ryan Walsh, the xenobiologist who had been on the original diplomatic mission, presented humanity's terms. The list was shorter than most observers expected, but each point was carefully crafted. First, Ryan announced complete disarmament of all Zephyrian military forces. All warships to be transferred to human command or destroyed.
Yes.
Scales darkened, but he nodded. He had expected this. Second, war reparations to be paid over 50 years to compensate for human losses during the conflict. Again, Vexter agreed. This, too, was standard practice among galactic civilizations. Third, full technology sharing. All Zephyrian scientific and technical knowledge to be made available to human researchers. Several alien observers whispered among themselves. This was a harsh but understandable demand. Fourth, Ryan continued, the establishment of a human protectorate over former Zephyrian territory. The whispers stopped. This was what everyone had been waiting to hear. How would humanity rule over the species they had defeated? Vexter spoke carefully. "What does this protectorate entail, Lisa?" Grant leaned forward. "That depends on you, Chancellor. We're offering your people a choice." "What choice?" General Amy Tucker, who had overseen Earth's military transformation, spread a map on the table. Option 1. Continued military occupation. Human forces maintain permanent bases on all Zephyrian worlds. Your people live under direct human rule. Vexter S. head drooped. This was the fate he had expected. Option 2, Amy continued. Autonomous governance under human protection. Your people rule themselves, but under the umbrella of the Terran Galactic Protectorate. You maintain your own government, your own culture, your own way of life. But you accept human leadership in matters of defense and foreign policy. The Chancellor's head snapped up. It would allow us to govern ourselves. Under certain conditions, Lisa replied. No military forces beyond what's needed for local peacekeeping. No aggressive actions against other species. And full cooperation with human authorities when requested. Intelligence Officer Kethman, who had accompanied Vexter as an advisor, spoke up. This is not what we expected. What did you expect? Jake asked. Slavery, destruction, the complete elimination of our species. Jake was quiet for a moment. Is that what the Zephyrian hegemony would have done to humanity if you had one? Kethman looked uncomfortable. Yes, that is the standard procedure for defeated species, Jake said. We're not the Zephyrian hegemony. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the historian who had been captured early in the war, entered the room carrying a thick document. Chancellor, you asked during our previous meetings about human concepts of warfare. I think it's time you learned about our concepts of peace. She placed the document on the table. This is the Marshall Plan. After the most devastating war in human history, the victorious nations chose to rebuild their enemies rather than destroy them. They turned former opponents into allies. Vexer stared at the document. Understand, we learned something important from our own history, Elena explained. Destroying your enemies completely might feel satisfying, but it's not practical. It's better to turn them into friends. But why would you want us as friends? We tried to exterminate your species, Lisa smiled. 'Cause, Chancellor, we've studied your people during this war. You're not evil. You were just following the only model of galactic politics you knew. A model based on dominance and submission. We're offering you a different model, Amy added. One based on cooperation and mutual benefit. Around the room, alien observers took notes frantically. This was unprecedented in galactic history. Conquering species had ever offered such generous terms to a defeated enemy. What assurance do we have that you will honor these terms? Vexter asked. Jake gestured to a viewing screen that showed Earth's orbital stations. You see those shipyards, Chancellor? They're building new vessels every day, not because we plan to conquer more territory, but because we want to be ready to defend our friends. Your friends? Any species that joins the Terran Protectorate will be under our protection. That means if someone attacks you, they attack us. And as you've learned, attacking humanity is not a wise decision. Kethman leaned close to Vexter and whispered urgently. Chancellor, this offer is more generous than anything in recorded galactic history? Vexter nodded slowly. I am beginning to understand that humanity is unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The formal signing ceremony took place the next day. Representatives from across the galaxy attended, including several species that had been secretly negotiating their own agreements with humanity during the war. As Vexter signed the treaty that made his people the first members of the Terran Galactic Protectorate, found himself thinking about the human saying that Dr. Vasquez had taught him. Keep your friends close, your enemies closer. The humans had done exactly that. Instead of destroying their enemies, they had chosen to make them into friends. But they had also made it clear that friendship with humanity came with both benefits and responsibilities, Chancellor Lisa said. As they concluded the ceremony, there's one more thing we'd like to discuss. Yes, we have a colony world called New Geneva that's still under development. We'd like to invite Zephyrian engineers to help with the project, your people of expertise. In atmospheric processing that we could use, Vexter was stunned. You want our help? We want your partnership, Jake corrected. There's a big galaxy out there, and humanity has learned that it's easier to explore it with friends than alone. 6 months later, Vexter stood on the observation deck of a joint human-Zephyrian research station, watching ships from a dozen different species dock at the facility. The Terran Protectorate had grown rapidly as word spread about humanity's approach to galactic politics. It's remarkable, Kethman said, joining him at the viewing port. A year ago, we were trying to destroy each other. Now our children attend the same schools. through the transparent aluminum. They could see human and Zephyrian children playing together in the station's recreation area. The young ones had adapted to the new reality far more quickly than their parents. Did we make the right choice? Vexter asked. Look around you, Kethman replied. Trade is flourishing. Scientific research is advancing faster than ever before. And for the first time in galactic history, major species are cooperating instead of competing. Human technician approached them. It was Tony Rodriguez, the engineer who had developed so many of the weapons that had defeated Zephyrian forces. Now, he was working on projects to improve life for everyone in the Protectorate. Chancellor, we're ready for the test of the new terraforming equipment, Tony said. Your atmospheric specialists think they've solved the humidity problem. Nodded. Excellent. I'll be there shortly. As Tony walked away, Kethman chuckled. Remember when we thought humans were just brutal savages? They are brutal, Vexter replied. But they're also practical. They fight as hard as anyone in the galaxy, but they know when to stop fighting and start building. Communications alert sounded, and Vexter activated his personal communicator. The message was from Admiral Morrison, now serving as the first director of Protectorate Defense. Chancellor, we're receiving reports of hostile activity in the Outer Rim. A species called the Dystrocan Empire is threatening several independent worlds. They're demanding immediate surrender or facing total annihilation. Vexter felt his scales shift color with concern. What are your orders, Admiral? Prepare a joint task force, human and Zephyrian ships working together. It's time to show this Dystrocan Empire what happens when someone threatens our friends. As Vexter began organizing the defense fleet, he realized that the galaxy was about to learn an important lesson.